The last thing still warm in the house was the coffee mug, and even that trembled in my hand. My son leaned against my kitchen counter, like he'd paid the mortgage. Arms folded, eyes dry. "It's done," he said, casual as a weather report. "It's already sold." I looked at the empty space on my wrist and for a beat forgot how to breathe. 6 months without Frank, and I'd learned grief has a daily weight. A small silver circle I wound each morning the way he'd taught me. That ritual had been a bridge over cold water. Mike had set fire to it. "You sold your father's watch?" It came out thin, a wire ready to snap. Across from him, Ashley finally looked up from her phone, her voice coated in something syrupy and false. "Dorothy, it's not healthy to cling to things. You need to move forward." I knew that tone. It had narrated my life since the funeral, prescriptions for what Frank would have wanted, always arriving right as they wanted something too. Mike checked the shiny computer on his wrist. "I got 800. Not bad." 800 for a story worn into steel. A 1978 Submariner, bought the week our son was born, paid for with overtime and stubborn pride. The watch had known our wedding, our fights, the cracked tile in this kitchen, and the quiet click-click Frank made when he was thinking. There are prices, and then there is value. Only one of those speaks your name back to you. "I'm getting it back," I said, and the voice I heard belonged to the woman who'd balanced 4 decades of budgets down to the penny. Mike shrugged, already halfway to the door. Ashley tossed me a smile so rehearsed it might have had choreography. "Therapy helps," she said, which is what people say when they want you to stop making moral noise. The pawn shop was exactly where grief would go if it needed fluorescent lighting, narrow aisles, stale air, glass cases reflecting tired faces. The man behind the counter wore tattoos like armor and squinted at me with practiced skepticism. "You hear about the Rolex?" he asked. Before I could nod, he added, "Your son told me you might come." A little click sounded in my chest, the sound of a lock I hadn't noticed before. "I'll buy it back," I said. "Whatever you paid, whatever you want." He winced. "Lady, I'd help if I could. Cash buyer came in this morning. No returns." In my mind, some nameless man fastened my life around his wrist and walked into traffic. I must have swayed because the clerk softened. His name tag said Danny. "There was something weird, though," he said, disappearing into the back and returning with a small manila envelope. "Came out when we cleaned it for sale. Hidden panel, professional work." Inside, a folded square of paper gone buttery at the edges, my husband's careful handwriting marching across it. Dorothy's birthday, the top line read, except not my real birthday. The day we met at that outdoor dance, a July night. Cheap speakers, the city glittering like a promise. Beneath the sentence, a code, letters and numbers that sat on the page with their arms crossed, daring me to try the door. "Do you recognize any of it?" Danny asked. The truth was a splinter, familiar. Frank kept ledgers like holy texts. He tracked everything: socks purchased, interest earned, the last pear in the fruit bowl. If a thing mattered, it appeared in ink and never left. "The buyer," I said. "What did he look like?" Danny's jaw tightened. "Paid cash. Said he collects vintage Rolexes." When I mentioned we found something inside, he got interested. Interested is the word you use when you don't want to say hungry. By the time I stepped back into the April light, Chicago's wind had teeth again. I tucked the envelope into my purse where it burned like a small sun and drove home with both hands high on the wheel, tasting copper at the back of my tongue. The flavor betrayal leaves when it's still fresh. At Frank's old desk, the chair creaked the way it always had, an old friend clearing its throat. I spread 43 years of our life around me. Bank statements with tidy columns, tax returns, retirement notes handwritten in the blocky letters he used when he wanted everything correct forever. The code glared up from the desk blotter, sharp and patient. Some widows keep casseroles in their freezer for months. I kept this dilemma. SS4457, CHY 5DS. I traced each character as if it might whisper. SS, Social Security? Or something Swiss? CH, Chicago or a country code? Duo out 15. That was our anniversary. DS were my initials, a puzzle left in plain sight on the wrist where my fingers had rested 1,000 times. My phone buzzed across the wood like a bug. Mike, I let it ring out. For once, I would not narrate my feelings for an audience reluctant to applaud. There's a particular silence when a secret prepares to introduce itself. It felt like that, a hush before the curtain. I folded Frank's note in thirds, the way he'd fold it, and slid it back into the envelope. Whatever he'd hidden for me. And whoever bought that watch knew more than a collector should. Grief had taught me to survive the next 5 minutes. This was different. This asked me to be the woman I used to be, the one who could smell a bad loan before the signature dried, who knew the difference between a problem and a plan. I turned on the desk lamp, its circle of light firm as a vow, and started to work. The code stared back at me that night like it had teeth. I'd placed it in the center of Frank's blotter, surrounded by his neat rows of bank statements, as though it belonged in their company. SS4457, CH08 5DS. It wasn't random. Frank never did random. He was the kind of man who filed the warranty card for a toaster in triplicate. If he wrote this down and hid it in his watch, it meant something. Something he couldn't say out loud. I tried to picture him. Mornings. Winding the Rolex while his coffee percolated. That steady click of the crown, his thumb moving in rhythm, then the faint smile, as if he were winding me into the day, too. All that time, was he listening to me chatter about grocery lists, about the neighbor's barking dog while secretly wearing a code pressed to his skin? I started breaking it apart. SS, Social Security. But his number started with 457, not 4457, or maybe SS meant Swiss. Frank loved order, logic, acronyms that pointed to bigger systems. CH, Chicago. The city was in our bones. We're Odi Thief, my breath caught. August 15th, our wedding anniversary. DS and my initials, Dorothy Sullivan. I wrote it out 3 times in a row until my pen dug grooves in the paper. It wasn't just numbers. It was a breadcrumb trail he'd left for me, stitched with memory and marriage, hidden in plain sight. Still, codes alone don't open doors. They need keys. Frank always believed the right key was something personal, something no stranger could guess. He used my birthday for our Wi-Fi password, our anniversary for his ATM pin. He liked to test me on it, as if part of loving him was remembering the math of us. I reached for his old laptop. The machine groaned awake, still smelling faintly of his aftershave, as if he'd just shut it down yesterday. My hands trembled over the keys. I typed the code into a search bar first. Nothing. Just gibberish results about serial numbers and shipping codes. My pulse was hammering. I tried again. This time on the login page of a discreet investment site I stumbled on during my digging. Secure Solutions Investment Management, Cayman Islands. The name sounded like a velvet curtain hiding a steel vault. I typed in SS4457C0815DS. The page shifted. Valid account number. My breath snagged, sharp and shallow. Frank hadn't just been meticulous. He'd been hiding something monumental. Now came the password. I tried our wedding date. Nothing. Our address. Wrong. My real birthday. Denied. And then I remembered the note. Dorothy's birthday, July 15th, 1955. The day I knew I'd marry her. not my actual birthday, the night we'd met at that summer dance, when I wore a yellow dress too bright for my own shyness, and Frank had said later that he'd already made up his mind about forever. I typed, "Wo71555. The screen blinked, access granted, and then the numbers appeared, glowing with the calm arrogance of truth. Current balance, 2,172,096 or 37. I pressed both palms to my face. Nearly $3 million, hidden for decades. $3 million, while I clipped coupons, patched Frank's work shirts, argued with him over whether we could afford to replace the broken dishwasher. $3 million, while I stood in the grocery store deciding between store-brand cereal or nothing at all. The betrayal was white-hot, but not the kind Mike had handed me. This was colder, deeper. It was the realization that the man I'd lain beside for 43 years had lived a parallel life, that every time he shook his head about expenses, he knew this account was sitting in the dark, waiting. My stomach turned, but my hands clicked through the account history. The deposits started small, $500 here, $1,000 there. Then around 2008, they surged, $20,000 at a time, marked property liquidation. Frank had been moving money like a man preparing for a storm. But if he wasn't saving for us, then who was he saving it from? I thought I knew Frank. I thought our marriage was a story told in shared rituals and quiet loyalty. But this was another chapter entirely, one I hadn't been invited to read until he was gone. Outside, the city hummed its indifferent tune. Inside, my house was no longer a tomb of grief. It was a stage where a secret had finally stood up and cleared its throat. I shut the laptop, sat in the silence, and whispered into the dark, "What did you do, Frank?" And somewhere deep inside me, the old Dorothy, the bank manager who could sniff out fraud across a desk, leaned forward with sharp eyes and said, "Find out." The next night, I sat in the dim light of Frank's old desk lamp, the air heavy with paper dust and unanswered questions. My hand hovered over the laptop like it was a weapon. I'd found the fortune, but money alone doesn't explain a man's secrets. Frank had been a careful accountant his whole life, the kind of man who tucked away receipts for light bulbs. A hidden account worth nearly $3 million wasn't care, it was strategy. Buried in the account was a folder marked, "For Dorothy, emergency only." My throat went dry. I clicked. The screen filled with his face. Frank, my Frank, filmed on what looked like a lunch break in his office. He looked older, worn, with tired eyes that still carried that stubborn warmth. For 6 months, I'd only had silence and photographs. Now he was looking right at me. "Dorothy," he began, his voice steady, but softer than I remembered. "If you're seeing this, I'm gone. And something's gone wrong." The room tilted. He rubbed his forehead in that way he always did when balancing a budget or fixing the old lawnmower. He went on, "This money, it was never mine. It was my father's. He hid it before he died in 1981, told me to protect it, to only use it if our family was ever in real danger. I invested carefully, quietly. I didn't tell you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I needed to keep it beyond reach. For you, for us. Danger." The word sat between us like a shadow. He hadn't said if something happened, but when. My husband, who never used words carelessly, was warning me across time. The video flickered. He explained how every dollar was documented, how the account was shielded with legal protections. He wanted me to know it was clean, legitimate. But I couldn't hear the details. I was stuck on the way his eyes kept darting, as if he was aware of something pressing in. Then came the part that made my skin prickle. "I hoped you'd never need this, that we'd live long enough to laugh about it someday over dinner. But if you found the watch, Dorothy, then it means I didn't have the time. And it means..." He hesitated, lips tight, voice cracking almost imperceptibly. Means they were closer than I thought. The video ended. The silence in the room pressed against my ears until I thought they might burst. Who was they? I scrolled back through the account history, desperate for answers. The last deposit, just 2 weeks before Frank's heart gave out at work, read, $25,000, emergency liquidation. The phrase seared into me. Emergency. He'd been pulling money quickly, selling property, preparing for something. I slammed the laptop shut, heart thudding. For decades, I thought Frank's secrets were small, a hidden cigarette now and then, the Christmas gift receipts he tried to disguise. But this was a man moving like someone being hunted. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter until my knuckles went white. Mike's voice from earlier still rang in my head. Dismissing the Rolex as just a watch, Ashley's smug suggestion about therapy, and yet Frank had hidden the very key to his empire inside that watch, as if he knew someone close might come looking. The betrayal had layers now. My son had sold the watch for pocket money, or so he said. But what if he'd been after more than cash? What if he'd known? The old bank manager inside me wasn't grieving anymore. She was sharpening her pencil, opening her ledger, and marking the first entry in a new case file. Frank had left me a message, a map, a fortune, and a warning. And if he was right about danger, then his death hadn't been the end of something. It was the beginning. The next morning, I poured myself coffee I barely tasted and sat down at Frank's desk again. The code, the video, the money. None of it fit with the man who used to scold me for buying name-brand orange juice, unless the life I thought I knew was only part of the story. I started combing through his records. Thousands of pages Frank had filed with monk-like discipline. And there it was, a pattern. Property deeds tucked between tax returns, sales slips buried under utility bills. Frank had been buying and selling real estate, all under the radar. But the name that jumped out at me made my blood turn cold. Sullivan Investments. LC. Every property Frank sold in the past year ended up in their hands. The name wasn't a coincidence. Sullivan was Mike's last name, too. My son's name. I dug deeper. In the back of a filing cabinet, behind stacks of insurance documents, I found a folder that didn't belong. Inside, a letter, typed neatly, dated 6 months before Frank's death, signed by a private investigator named Thomas Chen. Mr. Sullivan, per your request, I have completed the investigation into your son's financial activities. My findings are concerning. I read on, my hands trembling. Mike had gambling debts, hundreds of thousands, offshore betting sites, high-interest loans, all built on lies about his income. Worse, the investigator wrote that Mike had been making inquiries about inheritance law, even power of attorney, even elder care facilities. The man suggested my son was preparing to have Frank declared incompetent, to seize his estate before death could take care of it for him. I pressed the paper flat on the desk, but the word still buckled. My own son. The same boy Frank had taught to throw a baseball, the same child I'd stayed up nights with through fevers, the same teenager who'd sworn he'd make something of himself. That boy had grown into a man who saw his parents as obstacles. Suddenly the pawn shop made sense. Mike hadn't sold the Rolex for travel money. He'd been searching. Frank's watch wasn't just sentimental. It was the lockbox key to everything. Mike hadn't stumbled into betrayal. He'd planned it. My phone buzzed, Mike's name flashing again. This time I answered, my voice clipped. "Mom," he said, all breezy charm. "Ashley says you caused a scene at the pawn shop." "I went to buy back your father's watch," I replied. "Unfortunately, someone else got to it first." "See? He laughed lightly, though it rang false. Problem solved. Time to move on. I almost hung up, but then I heard myself say, there was something hidden inside the watch, a message from your father. Silence stretched long enough to taste. Then Mike's voice sharpened, losing its varnish. What kind of message? Numbers, letters. I'm not sure yet. His tone shifted again, tight, urgent. Read it to me. I smiled bitterly at the phone. There it is. Interest. The first flicker of life he'd shown since Frank's funeral, and it wasn't for me. It was for the code. I'll figure it out, I said. It's probably nothing important. Maybe I should come over, help you. Now I did laugh, sharp and hollow. Yesterday you told me to stop living in the past. Today you're desperate to dig through it? No, thank you. He sighed, masking irritation with that heavy tone of condescension he'd mastered. Fine, but don't come crying to me when you drive yourself crazy chasing ghosts. When the line went dead, I stared at the investigator's report again. The words swimming, gambling debts, fraudulent loans, plans to strip me of everything. My grief was no longer just for Frank. It was for the son I thought I had, and the stranger who stood in his place. 2 days later, the knock on my door was too polite to be anything but trouble. When I opened it, there they stood, Mike with his easy smirk, Ashley in her designer coat, perfume already filling the hallway like an early warning system. She carried herself like she was the one who owned this house, and Mike's eyes flicked past me, scanning Frank's desk the moment he stepped inside. We were just checking in, Ashley sang. Her voice dipped in saccharine. Before our flight. I folded my arms. Checking in or checking up? Mike ignored the jab. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, sitting as if summoned. Mom, about Dad's watch. You said something about a message? There it was, not condolences. Not curiosity about how I was holding up, just the hunger. I leaned against the counter, studying them like suspects in my old bank office. Yes, a note, some numbers, nothing that would mean anything to you. Ashley's head tilted, her practice smile slipping into something sharper. Numbers? She asked too quickly. What kind of numbers? My lips curved into a smile that wasn't kind. The kind you don't need to worry about. Mike's jaw twitched. He tried again, softer. Mom, let me help you. I know finance. If Dad left an account, you'll need me. I let the silence hang just long enough for discomfort to bloom. Then I dropped the bomb. Sullivan Investments, LLC. Ashley's face went white, her composure cracking for the first time. Mike froze. For one electric second, they looked like children caught stealing from the cookie jar. Ring any bells? I asked, voice cold. Mike swallowed hard, then forced a laugh that landed with a thud. That's just a business name. Lots of Sullivans in Chicago. True, I said evenly. But not many who buy up every property your father liquidated. Not many who do it with cash while drowning in gambling debt. The air shifted. Gone was the false warmth. What remained was sharp, metallic. Ashley stepped forward, her mask fully gone now. You don't know what you're talking about, I straightened, my full height suddenly useful. I know enough. I know Frank hired a private investigator. I know every lie, every loan, every bet you've made. And I know you didn't sell that watch for vacation money. You sold it looking for what your father hid. Mike's face drained of color, his bravado collapsing into something more dangerous. Desperation. For a fleeting moment, I saw my son as a little boy again, scared and ashamed. But then Ashley dug her manicured nails into his arm, grounding him back into the man they had chosen to become. This isn't over, she hissed, venom dripping from each word. I opened the door, pointing toward it like the judge I suddenly realized I was. It was over the moment you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive. They left in silence, but the echo of their footsteps carried a promise. Not retreat, but regrouping. I closed the door, locking it twice. My hand shook as I pressed them flat against the wood. For the first time since Frank died, I wasn't mourning. I was preparing for battle. The doorbell rang the next morning, sharp and officious, like someone announcing the start of a trial. Through the peephole I saw them, not Mike this time, but a woman in an immaculate gray suit, her smile already drawn into place like a weapon, and a younger man beside her holding a sleek tablet. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said when I cracked the door. "I'm Catherine Wells from Wells, Morrison and Associates. This is my colleague, David Kim. We represent your son in some family legal matters." Family legal matters. My gut twisted. That's what vultures call a carcass before the pecking begins. "We're here because Michael is concerned about you," Catherine continued, her voice so smooth it nearly slid past my defenses. "Managing complex finances alone while grieving can be overwhelming. He only wants to help shoulder the burden." David tapped his tablet and turned it toward me. Pages of legal text scrolled under his finger. "We've prepared documents granting Michael temporary power of attorney, just until you've had time to heal." I almost laughed. Temporary, like a thief temporarily holding the keys to the vault. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs," I said, tightening my grip on the doorknob. Catherine's smile sharpened. "Of course. But if you refuse, Michael is prepared to file a petition with the court regarding your mental competency. Accessing offshore accounts, conducting international transfers, these could be seen as erratic." There it was. The threat Frank's investigator had warned about. My son painting me senile, unstable, ready for guardianship. The story Ashley had probably been whispering at family gatherings, planting seeds like weeds. I tilted my head, meeting Catherine's gaze with a calm I didn't feel. "You know what's interesting about threats?" I asked. "They only work if the person you're threatening doesn't have better lawyers." For the first time, her professional mask slipped. "Excuse me." "Tell my son," I said, my voice steady as the lock clicking into place behind me, "that Frank didn't just leave me money. He left me protection." I shut the door in their faces, the thud of it ringing like a gavel. My hands were shaking, but my next move was clear. I dug out the card I'd found in Frank's files, the name written neatly in his handwriting. Thomas Chen, private investigator. My fingers trembled as I dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and professional. "Chen Investigations." "This is Dorothy Sullivan," I said, my throat tight. "Frank's widow." Silence, then a slow inhale. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've been expecting your call. Frank told me you might need my services someday." The words sank into me like a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. "He did?" "Yes. About 6 months ago, Frank asked me to prepare a comprehensive legal defense package, evidence, documentation, everything you'd need if anyone ever tried to question your competency or your right to his assets." My knees nearly gave out. Frank had known. He'd anticipated this exact moment. "How ready is it?" I whispered. "By the time I'm done presenting what your husband collected, your son's gambling debts, the fraudulent loans, recordings of conversations about declaring you incompetent, Michael won't just lose his case. He may face criminal charges." I pressed the phone to my ear, tears streaming silently down my face. For months I'd felt abandoned, alone. But here it was, proof that Frank had been 3 steps ahead, still shielding me even after death. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice trembling but resolute, I think it's time we made some phone calls. Thomas Chen's office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, the kind of place where secrets are catalogued and turned into weapons. He spread the files across his mahogany desk like a general unrolling battle plans. Bank records, gambling slips, photographs, even audio transcripts. Your husband was thorough, Chen said, tapping a folder thick with receipts. Mike wasn't just reckless. He was arrogant. He left a trail you could drive a truck through. I sifted through the evidence with shaking hands. There it was in black and white. Offshore gambling debts stacked higher than my mortgage, fraudulent loans against phantom income, transcripts of hushed conversations about putting me in a nursing home, my own son strategizing my erasure. How did Frank get all of this? I asked, my voice catching on the weight of it. Chen leaned back, his expression grim. He had your house wired for sound last year, completely legal, his property. Every time Mike and Ashley visited, every conversation about your mental state, your finances, Frank recorded it all. I thought of those afternoons at the kitchen table, Ashley sipping her overpriced lattes, dropping casual little comments about how forgetful I'd been. I thought of Mike rolling his eyes when I mislaid a set of keys, muttering that maybe I needed help. They hadn't been conversations, they'd been rehearsals, and Frank had captured every line of their play. Chen slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Frank left instructions for me to give you this if things escalated. My heart thumped as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated just a week before his death. My dearest Dorothy, if you're reading this, then Mike has shown his true colors. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to carry this burden. The money isn't just security, it's justice. Every dollar came from investments I made using information Mike himself bragged about. He thought he was outsmarting the world, but I listened. I invested in the same properties, the same tips, but with the inheritance my father left. Mike unknowingly built his own trap. I used his greed to build a fortress for you. Now it's your choice. You can forgive him, love him despite everything, hope he learns. Or you can let him face the consequences of trying to steal from his own mother. Either way, the power is yours, my love. It always has been. Forever yours, Frank, the words blurred as tears filled my eyes. He hadn't just been hiding money. He'd been orchestrating a safeguard, turning our son's corruption into the very foundation of my survival. Chen's voice cut through the fog. Mrs. Sullivan, are you ready to proceed? I thought about Mike at 6 years old, hair sticking up in the back, clutching Frank's hand on his first day of school. Then I thought of him standing in my kitchen 2 weeks ago, sneering that I should seek therapy while plotting to rob me blind. Some bridges burn themselves. Yes, I said, my voice steady now. File everything, today. 2 mornings later, the quiet of my street shattered. 3 black SUVs rolled up to Mike and Ashley's house. Men in FBI jackets spilled out, carrying boxes, hauling computers, confiscating the life my son had built on lies. My phone rang. Mike's voice was frantic. Mom, what did you do? I watched through my kitchen window as agents led Ashley out in handcuffs, her designer sunglasses hanging crooked on her face. I protected myself, I said, my tone flat, final. Something you should have done for your family instead of gambling it away. You don't understand, Mike begged, his voice cracking. This will destroy us. You destroyed yourselves, I replied. I just kept the receipts. The line went silent except for Ashley's shrill scream in the background. Through the glass, I watched my son lower his head into the back of a government car, looking less like the man who had betrayed me and more like the frightened boy he once was. 3 weeks later, I was back in Chen's office. papers stacked neatly before me, the final signatures drying like verdicts. Mike and Ashley's empire had collapsed overnight, assets frozen, businesses seized, federal charges pending. Ashley had already taken a plea deal. Mike was staring down years of restitution, and the humiliation of his name splashed across headlines. But even now, Frank wasn't finished. Chen's secretary knocked softly, ushering in a man I didn't recognize. He was in his 60s, well-dressed, carrying a velvet box I knew before he set it down. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, extending his hand. "My name is Richard Torres. I'm a retired federal marshal. Your husband hired me 20 years ago." My chest tightened. "Hired you? For what?" He opened the box. Inside, gleaming under the office light, was Frank's Rolex. My breath caught. "I'm the one who bought it from the pawn shop," Richard explained. "Frank arranged for me to monitor certain situations. The moment that watch showed up in circulation, I was notified." He turned the watch over and pressed gently. A second compartment clicked open, a smaller, hidden chamber even the pawn shop hadn't discovered. Nestled inside was a micro SD card. Frank recorded everything, Richard said. Conversations, financial records, meetings. He built an archive, Mrs. Sullivan, enough evidence to bury any challenge to your competency and ensure you never lose what he left you. Chen slid the card into his computer. Folders bloomed across the screen. Audio files, video clips, scanned documents, photographs of Mike shaking hands with loan sharks, Ashley whispering with lawyers. Frank hadn't just left me money, he'd left me armor. Richard handed me one final envelope, the handwriting unmistakable. "Dorothy, you were always stronger than you knew. I only made sure you'd have the tools to prove it. Love always, Frank." 6 months later, I stood in the bright lobby of Chicago Children's Hospital, watching a brass plaque being polished into place. The Frank Sullivan Memorial Wing, funded by Dorothy Sullivan. The offshore fortune had not only secured my future, it had built something bigger, something Frank always dreamed of. Back at home, life was quieter, freer. I'd bought myself a cottage near the lake, joined book clubs, volunteered twice a week. For the first time in decades, I was making choices not out of sacrifice, but out of want. One evening, as dinner simmered, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman, her face nervous but familiar. Mike's daughter, Melissa. "Grandma Dorothy," she said when I opened the door. Her voice wavered, eyes glassy. "I know I should have come sooner. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what Dad did." I gathered her into my arms, the scent of her shampoo like the ghost of childhood summers. "You have nothing to apologize for," I whispered. At dinner, she told me about her new job as a teacher, her fiancé, and how Ashley had poisoned their family with lies about me. "I missed you so much," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I never stopped wanting to see you," I told her. Later, as she left with promises to return every week, she paused at Frank's photo on the mantel. "He must have really loved that watch," she said softly. I touched it on my wrist, its weight steady, its ticking alive. He loved what it protected. That night, I sat on the porch, the lake painted in twilight blues. Frank had been gone 8 months, but somehow, through codes and secrets and meticulous planning, he was still here, still fighting for me, still loving me the way only he knew how, quietly, strategically, with foresight that reached beyond the grave. People search their whole lives for that kind of love. I was lucky enough to wear it on my wrist for 43 years.